Chapter 2, The Ripple. November 4, 1991. Canary Islands. The Lady Ghislaine drifted quietly off the coast of Gran Canaria, its hull slicing through black water, its anchor long since stilled. The sea was unusually calm for November. Almost conspiratorially so, no wind, no swell, only the slow slap of the tide against fiberglass and steel. Aboard, Robert Maxwell moved like a restless ghost. He wore a monogrammed silk robe over crimson pajamas, his swollen frame lumbering unevenly along the upper deck. His slippers thudded softly against teak planks as he paused every few steps to mutter to himself, half curses, half interrogations. He glanced skyward, but the stars gave no reply. He was paranoid, yes, but not without reason. The empire he'd built, stitched together from debt, deception and deep state favors, was collapsing beneath him. His name was unraveling in the London press, and auditors had begun to circle his pension funds, like vultures smelling carrion. The banks were pulling away. The intelligence networks he once courted now returned his calls with delay, or not at all. A drink sloshed in his hand, cognac, almost neat. He stopped at the starboard railing, and leaned heavily against it, staring down into the indigo deep. His breath fogged the cool air, and the smell of salt and diesel clung to him like guilt. He withdrew a folded letter from his robe pocket, yellowed at the creases, and reread it in silence. It was typed, unsigned but unmistakably written in the bureaucratic dialect of spies. It listed arms shipments misrouted through Yugoslavia, a Swiss bank account tied to both the Vatican and Iran, and several names, one still in the White House, another in MI6, and one simply marked Jericho. He folded the letter and slipped it back into his pocket with shaking fingers. The moon had vanished behind a bank of low clouds, casting the sea in a dim grayscale. Inside the library, Robert Maxwell sat in a high-back chair bolted to the floor, hands clasped over his swollen gut like a bloated emperor awaiting exile. He reached for a cigarette but found only ashes in an empty crystal tray. The radio was dead again, no chatter, no weather, not even static. He tapped its side out of habit, then chuckled bitterly. He wasn't afraid, not in the traditional sense, but something old and reptilian had settled into his bones, instinct, the kind honed in the Carpathians, then in wartime Normandy, and again on Fleet Street, where smiling enemies wore dinner jackets and offered cigars. He'd survived the Nazis, reinvented himself in the British Army, lied his way into Oxford circles, married, fathered 9 children, buried 2, built Pergamon Press out of air and leverage, bought the Daily Mirror, and whispered in Margaret Thatcher's ear while dancing with MI6 and Mossad in alternating steps. He was a man who trafficked in secrets, not just stories, but state arrangements. Proxy arms deals to Iran under Israeli flags, shipment diversions through South Africa, quiet suppression of exposes, linking the CIA to Latin American juntas. He knew where the bodies were buried, because he'd helped dig some of the graves. But tonight, those secrets felt radioactive. The pension hole in Mirror Group accounts was widening by the hour. The Bank of England was no longer returning calls. Swiss bankers hinted that the Israeli bonds he was holding were unenforceable. Even Ari Ben Menashe had grown evasive. He rubbed his temples. How had it come to this? A folder lay open on the table, documents pulled from his private Tel Aviv cache. Some bore watermarks from Unit 8200. Others referenced meetings at the King David Hotel, hush-hush transfers, names half-redacted. There were receipts, photographs, and handwritten notes. Enough to kill reputations, derail governments, and detonate diplomatic illusions. He considered what to do. Leverage them? Sell them? Deliver them to Haaretz or Le Monde and ignite the world? Or seal them in a vault and disappear into the night with his name intact? Then he remembered what his Mossad contact once told him, during a blackout at Herzliya in 1987, "No man owns the secrets. They own you. We just choose the timing." Returning to his cabin, he tried to ignore the locked briefcase sat at the foot of the bed. The open one lay on the desk, cluttered with pages marked in red ink and singed at the edges. He couldn't bring himself to investigate either. He poured a half glass of brandy, and drank only a sip. He reached for a cigarette, but found only ashes, and an empty crystal tray. A folder lay open on the table, documents pulled from his private Tel Aviv cache. Some bore watermarks from Unit 8200. Others referenced meetings at the King David Hotel, hush-hush transfers, names half-redacted. There were receipts, photographs, and handwritten notes. Enough to kill reputations, derail governments, and detonate diplomatic illusions. He considered what to do. Leverage them? Sell them? Deliver them to Haaretz or Le Monde and ignite the world? Or seal them in a vault and disappear into the night with his name intact? Then he remembered what his Mossad contact once told him, during a blackout at Herzliya in 1987, "No man owns the secrets. They own you. We just choose the timing." Maxwell moved slowly, hands trembling as he opened the sealed communiqué. His lips shaped the words, but he didn't speak them aloud. Some phrases weren't meant for air. When he finished, he slipped the document into a weatherproof pouch, and reached beneath the berth. where a small panel concealed the object that had kept him alive longer than most thought possible. The biometric case. Custom built, sealed to his palm print, its indicator light blinked softly in the dark, as if awaiting its next directive. Inside was more than leverage, it was legacy insurance. Microfilm reels, off-the-books wire records, audio cassettes from safe-house taps, photo negatives of men who swore they'd never been in the room, and one flash drive, handed off by a CIA liaison in Vienna, its label handwritten, failsafe. Maxwell had never decrypted it, that wasn't the point, its mystery made it more dangerous. Across the cabin, the second case sat open on the desk, chaotic, scorched at the corners, stuffed with cables, draft reports, and memos from Herzliya and Geneva. The contents were uneven. Some pages had lost all strategic value. Others were live wires, capable of triggering diplomatic crises or blacklisting entire departments. He hadn't curated it. He'd simply thrown in what he didn't dare destroy. Beside it lay a sealed envelope, thick and marked in red block letters, to be opened if I die under unusual circumstances. Inside was his ledger. Not the full archive, but enough, a record of names, bank transfers, coded meeting points, arms transfers routed through embassies, back-channel payments to political campaigns. Mossad, MI6, CIA, none spared. The envelope wasn't meant for exposure, it was leverage. If anything happened to him, it would find its way to Haaretz, or Le Monde, or Langley. Or perhaps to all three. It was the bluff he'd been living behind for months. His version of a dead man's switch. Together, the envelope in his pocket, and the case weren't just protection. They were part of the Black Vault. Not the full one, that still lived in fractured memory in scattered safes across the globe, but this part was real enough to scare the right people. It was why he hadn't yet been pushed off a balcony, or found in his tub with the gas on. The vault bought him time. And yet, time was running out. He had waited too long. His health scare had passed. His disappearance plan, Paraguay, or the chalet in Grobondan under a false cousin's name, was now wishful thinking. The banks had grown quiet. His friends, evasive. And the signals from Herzliya were different now, colder, drier, framed like post-mortems. He reached into his robe and pulled out the letter. He placed it into a plastic sleeve and slid it into the red envelope. His fingers paused at the seal, not out of doubt, out of fatigue. Of all the things he'd built, this was what remained: 2 suitcases, a plastic folder, and the hope that he could still be more useful alive than dead. The satellite radio had been temperamental all day, cutting in and out like a nervous tick, flickering with just enough signal to mock certainty. Maxwell knew the truth. They weren't jamming him, not yet. Just letting him drift beyond reach, like a raft untethered from the mainland. Still, habit compelled him, a worn groove of ritual. He picked up the handset. Its plastic felt warm from the cabin's stale heat, yet foreign, like handling a relic from a war long over. He keyed in the number from memory. There was a brief delay, a mechanical pause, as if the system itself was weighing whether the call still mattered. Then, a soft click, static, a carrier tone, connection. He stood barefoot in the cabin, robe clinging to his back with sweat. The yacht moved beneath him in the same lazy rhythm that had rocked him to sleep for years. But now that motion felt suspect, like a lullaby sung by someone who no longer remembered the words. Behind him, the desk held its usual clutter: half a bottle of brandy, a dead lighter, the sealed biometric case blinking red once, then going still again. The envelope still lay where he'd left it, unopened, not yet labeled for anyone he trusted. Then, finally, her voice. "Hi, Daddy." "I wanted to hear your voice," he said, trying to smile as he spoke, hoping she could hear the warmth he could no longer conjure. "I've been thinking about a few things." A pause. "I'm about to go out. Dinner with some people. Can I call you later?" It was always some people. She never said who. Names had disappeared from her conversations over the past year, replaced by vague placeholders and silences that lasted a beat too long. Her world had become a polished void. Galleries, fundraisers, black tie evenings, but no specifics. No allies, no confessions. "I miss you," he said, more desperate than he intended. Another pause, this one longer, measured. "Me too, but—" Static fizzed, and she cut out. The connection clicked, then hissed. Her voice was clear this time, too clear, bright, breathy, a veneer of charm lacquered over distance. It wasn't how she spoke to him when they were alone. It was how she spoke when others might be listening. "I'm here," she said. Then added quickly, "Just running out the door. I thought I'd lost you," he said. "I wasn't sure this damned radio would find anything but fog, always running," he muttered. She laughed, too lightly. "You know how it is. The city never sleeps. Everyone wants something." "Do they want you? Or what you can give them?" Another pause. "I can handle myself," she said. Defensive, but measured. "You taught me that—" He looked out over the water, the sea like polished obsidian. "I taught you a lot of things I wish I hadn't." She said nothing. He tried to picture her, how she looked now, not in photos but in motion, at a table surrounded by millionaires who thought they were predators, at some art gala, her dress expensive and her expression unreadable. He wondered if she had handlers of her own now, or if she'd become one. Ghislaine, he said carefully, you're still young enough to choose. Choose what? To live without all this? He swallowed. Without being in service to ghosts? Dad, what are you talking about? I just mean, he hesitated, as if weighing the air. You don't have to follow every path they've drawn for you. You can still. The line cracked, static flared. He pressed the receiver harder to his ear. What? Say that again? But the signal was collapsing. Her voice was gone, replaced by a shallow whine, then silence. He stayed there, phone pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. He crossed the room and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. A packet of photographs stared up at him, grainy surveillance stills from Geneva, a list of bank transfers, names of shell companies tied to intelligence fronts. He had promised himself he'd protect her, that whatever this machine was, the one he had helped build brick by brick, she would never be crushed beneath it. But Ghislaine had never wanted protection. She wanted power, access, legacy. And now, as Maxwell's fingers lingered on the folder's edge, he realized she had already made her choice. Not against him, not for him, just beyond him. Turning the light off, he found his way to the bed. Laying his hefty torso down, he felt a wave of exhaustion. Maxwell's eyes closed. His mind drifted between memory and paranoia. The sea was endless and black, a mirrored void swallowing light and time. He drifted above it, suspended, breath shallow, heartbeat fading while sinking into the rhythm of the waves. Submerged now, and beneath, memories stirred. His childhood face surfaced briefly, pale and hollow-eyed, then disappeared into the depths. Around him, papers floated like debris in orbit, ink bleeding into the surrounding water. Headlines rippled and morphed into familiar names, names into numbers, each one a thread from the past, each one a reckoning. The voices began to chant, low and mechanical, calling out codes he'd buried years ago. Turning, sinking deeper now, not with fear but resignation, as if gravity were reclaiming all. Below, a soft light revealed a glass box, sealed and suspended. Inside, Ghislaine drifted motionless, eyes wide and unblinking, wires trailing from her head like roots searching for signal. She did not speak. He could not. His voice was gone. He reached for her but never moved. Pale hands emerged from the dark, velvet-skinned, formless, pulling him downward without resistance. The cold crept in, curling around the spine, wanting to say it had all been done for her. But there was nothing left to say. Burning lungs had ceased their rhythm, yet no panic felt. Only descent. A final, deliberate fall into something colder than water, heavier than guilt. The ocean folded over the soul like a shroud. November 5, 1991. His eyes snapped open as he awoke gasping. The room was silent. The dark ceiling panel swam overhead, slick with shadow, its angles unfamiliar with pulsing crimson highlights. A slow realization filtered in, not of where he was, but that something was wrong. The clock glowed a bright red 3:06 a.m. The red light on the biometric case beat on and off, blinking, waiting. He rose slowly, body heavy with the residue of sleep or something deeper. The cabin was too quiet, not the stillness of calm seas, but of breath held behind locked doors. He crossed to the deck. The air had changed, thickened, saturated, dense enough to drink. The sky had gone dark, moonless. The sea below had flattened into a surface so still it felt deliberate. Then came the sound. It arrived without crescendo, low and mechanical, barely louder than the blood in his ears. A shape approached across the water, black, unlit, almost invisible. The zodiac emerged from the void like something that had always been there, simply choosing now to be seen. No engine noise, no voice calling out, just a clean cut through the silence. The craft glided alongside the Lady Ghislaine. A hook arced into the darkness and caught the rail on the first throw. Two men climbed, one after the other. There, movements were fluid but without urgency, the kind that comes from repetition, not comfort. No introduction, no handshake, just gloves, long dark coats and faces shrouded beneath the brim of a cap. Maxwell stood motionless. He did not ask who sent them. Some questions only cheapened the answer. The men stepped onto the deck. The one in front came up and stopped slowly, extended a leather dossier, unmarked, worn. Maxwell took it. The man didn't wait to be invited. He simply nodded toward the cabin. Inside, he said. Not a suggestion. Maxwell obeyed. They entered the parlor without words. A kettle had already been left out. Open it, he directed. The dossier opened easily. Most of the pages were blank. The final one was not. It bore coordinates, a date, and a signature line already labeled with his name. Maxwell stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up. You know what's in the other case, Maxwell said, nodding toward the locked unit by the bed. His voice was steadier than he expected, but his breath betrayed him, shallow, uneven. The lead operative did not turn his head. "We do? Then you understand what happens if it opens." At this, the man's eyes flicked briefly to the floor, as if bored by the premise. "We understand what would have happened," he said. "If you truly meant to trigger it, it would already be in motion." Maxwell bristled. "You're certain?" The reply came like a shrug wrapped in words, "We're certain enough." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything unspoken, files unread, recordings unplayed, systems still tethered to his pulse. But it no longer mattered, not in the way it once had. The threat had softened over time like a detonator left in the rain. Its value had expired the moment he hesitated. Maxwell sat back, the chair creaking under his weight. The realization settled not as panic but as understanding. He wasn't being beaten, he was being bypassed. The network he had helped build now flowed around him, indifferent. Not a single lever he'd once held still worked. He was no longer the architect, he was the liability. He let out a slow breath and looked up at the man, who now stood beside him near the table, the dossier held lightly in his gloved hand like a priest holding a wafer. "History will misplace you," the man said almost gently, "but your daughter will be remembered." Maxwell turned away, not to hide his face, but to control it. "Make sure she is," he said. The man gave a single nod. Maxwell sat back. It was a checkmate delivered without emphasis. He had spent years bluffing with power, leveraging secrets into safety. But now, sitting across from a man who didn't need to raise his voice to assert command, he felt the shape of something older than fear, irrelevance. His eyes fell to the document. He reached for the pen, his name scratched softly across the paper. The signature wobbled slightly at the end. The operative retrieved the folder. He did not offer thanks. He did not leave. Instead, he gestured toward the tea. "May I have some before we go?" From his coat, the second operative produced a small glass vial and placed it silently on the table. Then, calmly, "Put it in." Maxwell stared at the vial, then at the cooling tea. His hand hovered, then moved. He knew what this was, an easy out for them to blame his death on a heart attack. His mind filled with red and rage. "I assume this is also part of the arrangement?" Maxwell said, his voice low and tight. The man gave the faintest nod. A pause, then the lead operative added, without inflection, "You have honored us, therefore we will not kill you." Maxwell blinked, uncertain. "This must end," the man continued. "But we don't wish to destroy you, or your family, or what remains of your reputation. You still have dignity." Maxwell hesitated. A thin sheen had formed across the surface of the tea, not oil exactly, something finer, less visible. He looked back at the man, but the man was already watching the sea. The man gave the faintest nod. "Well, will it be the easy way or the hard way?" "No!" Maxwell screamed, standing abruptly, pushing the table, nearly flipping it, knocking the shorter one back. The lead operative punched behind him, putting him in a one-handed chokehold, his other arm pulling something from his pant pocket, then a sharp sting behind Maxwell's right ear. Cold liquid surged under his skin. At first he froze, then realization hit like a jolt, and he stood there in frozen shock. A few breaths later, his head had begun to pound, dull at first, then gathering behind his eyes like a tide pressing against the inside of his skull. He reached for the edge of the table to steady himself, but his fingers missed. The sensation was subtle, then not. The room tilted slightly, though the yacht remained motionless. His breath came shorter, throat dry, chest tight. Something inside him was slipping. The world narrowed. He stood abruptly, then staggered. His feet felt underwater. He leaned against the cabin doorframe, gasping, robe damp against his back. The air had gone thick, oppressive. The teak walls warped in his vision, swelling and then receding like waves. Maxwell's bulk suddenly twisted violently. The chair screeched across the teak and slammed into the wall. The tall one reached for him, too slow. Maxwell's hand, broad and heavy, clamped on the man's throat and shoved. Papers fluttered to the floor. The second man lunged to restrain him, but Maxwell swung back with his elbow, catching him in the jaw with a meaty crack. Blood sprayed across Maxwell's robe, warm and immediate. The drug was working. His muscles felt heavier, his balance tipping, but adrenaline poured through him. He roared, a sound more animal than human, and surged forward. The tall man went stumbling into the cabin doorframe, rattling it in its hinges. The second operative, recovering, ducked low and tackled Maxwell around the waist. They slammed into the table, shattering the tea set, the sound sharp in the enclosed space. Maxwell grabbed for the man's head, fingers digging into the wound he'd just opened, nails scraping skin. The man hissed through clenched teeth. "Get him on the deck!" The tall one barked. They drove him backward, forcing him through the doorway, Maxwell's feet sliding across the wet teak. His breathing came in harsh bursts now, the edges of his vision tightening, but his sheer size kept them from taking him down. A sudden shift of his hips broke the shorter man's grip. Maxwell spun, half losing his footing, but drove an open-handed shove into the tall man's chest that sent him reeling into the rail. The sea yawned beyond. The short one tried again, wrapping his arms around Maxwell's chest from behind. Maxwell slammed his head backward, the base of his skull catching the man square on the cheekbone. There was an audible crunch. The man cried out, blood pouring over Maxwell's shoulder. They were all slick now on deck, salt spray, sweat and blood turning the deck treacherous. The tall man recovered first, diving low, and the three of them lurched as one mass toward the starboard rail. Maxwell grabbed the taller man by his coat front and hauled him close, face to face. "You'll have to kill me," he growled. The stars above him swirled like distant embers caught in a wind he could no longer feel. His hand found the rail. Cool, familiar, solid. For one suspended breath, clarity returned. He saw himself from above, a man fighting for his life, robe clinging to damp skin, feet bare against the grain of a world he no longer governed. Then his knees started to buckle. The shorter operative used the moment to hook a leg and wrench Maxwell sideways. All three went over the rail in a tangled splash. The cold was instant and brutal. Maxwell's lungs seized, but instinct kept his arms moving, clawing for purchase. He caught the shorter man's head again and shoved it under, bubbles breaking around his fists. The tall one surfaced beside them, now holding something, a dull gleam in the moonlight, the wrench. Heavy, wet and inevitable. He swung once. The impact was muffled underwater but felt through Maxwell's skull in a nauseating wave. His grip loosened. The shorter man tore free, gasping to the surface. Maxwell's arms twitched, reaching for the rail, but the second blow came harder, fracturing bone with a deep, wet crack. The cold rushed in fully now, and the fight bled out of him in seconds. They hauled him into the Zodiac, his head lolling, one eye half open, blood mingling with seawater in slow ribbon streams. After taking some time, the short one was sent back to the ship, to make sure there was no sign of their presence on the yacht or of their scuffle, and any documents they did not want to be unsecure. After finishing his cleaning job, he made his way back to the Zodiac. The tall one started the motor. The Zodiac's outboard snarled to life, its sound swallowed quickly by the open Atlantic. Spray burst in cold arcs over the gunwale as the craft tore away from the Lady Ghislaine, the yacht's running lights shrinking into a single pale pin against the dark horizon. Maxwell's body lay sprawled in the center bench, head lolling with each bounce of the hull. Blood seeped slowly from the gash at his temple, mixing with seawater in thin pink spirals that pooled at the bottom of the boat. The taller operative glanced down at it, then at the short one, voice flat under the engine noise. "That's yours." The shorter man flexed his jaw, testing for movement, his face already swelling where Maxwell's elbow had broken skin. "He caught me clean. Nails. He'll have it under him, in the fibers." They exchanged a look, calculation moving between them like a signal. The tall one nodded once. "We're not leaving him dressed. We could burn his clothes." "Yes, take them. We will find a place to burn them," the tall operative confirmed. They slowed the boat just enough to keep from taking on water, the motor's pitch dropping to a low growl. The shorter man knelt by Maxwell's bulk and began peeling away the sodden robe. It came reluctantly, heavy with water, blood, and the cloying scent of jasmine tea. The pajamas followed, the silk clinging stubbornly to his skin. The taller one pulled a canvas duffel from beneath the bow and held it open. Each garment was fed inside, layered carefully to keep anything sharp from piercing the fabric. Once the last piece was in, he zipped the bag shut and looped cord around it twice, cinching it tight. He glanced back toward the yacht, now invisible. They'll search it. They'll find nothing. No prints, no fibers, just a missing man who probably fell. The shorter one wiped his hands on his coat, eyes on the horizon. And if they do find him? The tall man looked down at Maxwell's bare form, the skin already paling in the cold wind. "Without the clothes, there's nothing to match, and the water will do the rest." The shorter man gave a single sharp nod. "Then we dump the bag into a fire, no traces." They throttled up again, the Zodiac bucking under the acceleration, spray hitting Maxwell's skin in silver flashes under the moonless sky. 15 miles out, the tall one finally gestured, and together, they rolled the heavy body to the rail. "One more check," he said. The shorter one scanned the bench, the hull, the bilge, no scraps, no loose threads. The tall one leaned down, speaking almost to himself. Continuity complete. 15 miles out, they rolled him back into the water. He sank slowly, limbs drifting, the sea swallowing the last bubbles from his mouth. The sea received him. His body vanished beneath a brief frothy spray and a muffled splash. The surface rippled, one wave fanning out, lapping once against the hull like an afterthought. Then the water settled, healed as quickly as it had been disturbed. The yacht drifted on placidly, her crew below deck, unaware. But the ripple endured, quiet and invisible, slipping past the bow, threading into deeper currents, ahead and beneath. By dawn, the Lady Ghislaine drifted off Gran Canaria, poised in the pale morning light as if nothing had changed. The sea had resumed its slow, mechanical rhythm. At 7:14 on November 5, 1991, The first crew member to rise noticed two things: the yacht's engines were still off, and Robert Maxwell was no longer aboard. The previous evening had been uneventful. Maxwell had retired early, no disturbances had been logged, the weather was calm, wind under 5 knots, seas glassy, no moonlight. Standard conditions for a quiet Atlantic passage. By 7:38, 2 stewards and the ship's engineer had searched his quarters. The bed was undisturbed, his robe was missing, so were both briefcases. The internal phone was dead. The satellite radio hadn't transmitted since 2. At 8:12, a junior crewman broke protocol and radioed for assistance. The transmission was brief: captain not on board, possibly overboard, no foul play suspected. By 9:45, a Spanish rescue vessel launched from Gran Canaria, tasked with a 20-kilometer search perimeter. At 11:02, a spotter aircraft found an object drifting northeast on the current, Robert Maxwell's body, naked, 10 miles off the coast. The coroner's report, filed by a local official under diplomatic supervision, listed a small puncture mark behind the right ear, consistent with hypodermic injection. Cause of death, drowning consistent with fall from height and drowning. No evidence of foul play. Despite the obvious inconsistencies with no foul play, no autopsy was ordered. The coroner added natural causes exacerbated by drowning, then scribbled cardiac arrest in pen. The report was set aside, though never seen again. A replacement report with sanitized findings would be slipped in by an operative later before being submitted to the case documentation for public record. Maxwell's personal effects had vanished. The cabin safe was empty. Hard drives had been replaced with dummies, their ports cleaned of trace. His death certificate was issued by the British Embassy in Madrid. By 16, Mirror Group newspapers released a formal statement. With great sorrow, we confirm that our chairman, Robert Maxwell, was lost at sea in the early hours of November 5, 1991. The circumstances remain under investigation. We ask for privacy as the family mourns this extraordinary man. Aboard the yacht, the crew stuck to their accounts. Some suggested he had slipped, others implied he had jumped. No one mentioned the visitor, no one mentioned the missing documents. No questions were asked about the 2 briefcases, one locked, one open, both now gone. No one ever reported seeing the Zodiac. Days later, a sealed communique circulated through diplomatic channels in Tel Aviv. One line was flagged, closure confirmed. Risk factor neutralized. Secondary asset in transition. November 5, 1991, London, United Kingdom. The television glowed dully in the corner of the Montague Square flat, casting pale blue light across polished floorboards. It was barely past dawn, and the BBC's tone hadn't yet caught up to the gravity of the report. The headline scrolled beneath the anchor's mouth: Media mogul Robert Maxwell missing at sea. A still photo accompanied it, her father frozen mid-command, one hand raised, the other clenched, around some invisible lever of power. Ghislaine Maxwell sat on the edge of a suede ottoman, unblinking. The room around her was curated, neatly arranged hardcover volumes, glass decanters left untouched, a vase of tightly symmetrical roses already 2 days past their prime. Her silk robe hung open just enough to suggest vulnerability, though nothing about her posture conveyed it. The anchor's voice was soft, almost distant. The 68-year-old chairman of Mirror Group newspapers was last seen aboard his private yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, late Monday night. Spanish authorities have launched a search effort near the Canary Islands. She didn't turn up the volume. She already knew. Across the flat, a faint chirp broke the silence. Her pager. She moved without haste, checked the small digital screen. A long encrypted number flashed in staccato green. The London exchange was fake. The line it connected to was not. A moment later, she lifted the secure handset in the study and dialed from memory. There was a delay, 2 clicks, then a hiss, standard protocol for a scrambled channel. No greeting from the other end. Just the faint sound of wind over wire. I'm ready, she said, no reply. She hung up, went to the wardrobe, pulled a dark travel suit, no jewelry, no makeup, hair pinned into a tight twist. She opened the safe concealed in the bookshelf and removed a slim folder marked with a black triangle, no words. Inside was a one-way ticket, London to Gran Canaria. Passenger list herself, her mother Betty, and Mirror photographer Ken Lennox. By 8:17 she and her mother were in the back of a black car bound for Heathrow. She never checked her bag. The driver didn't speak, the air inside smelled faintly of dry tobacco and lemon polish. In the seat beside her, the briefcase sat untouched, its contents already memorized. Somewhere above the channel, she received a fax scan of a preliminary Spanish report, no confirmed identity, only male, Caucasian, recovered at sea. No cause of death beyond the perfunctory, drowning consistent with fall, no toxicology, no autopsy. Betty stared at the page for a long time before folding it into her lap. I can't. Not like this, she whispered. Ghislaine placed a hand over her mother's, firm and steady, the way one steadies a table before signing a document. By the time the flight crossed the Iberian coast, the captain asked Lennox to come forward. A fisherman had pulled a body from the Atlantic. Spanish authorities weren't certain it was Maxwell. Would Lennox view it first to spare Betty? They landed at an airbase. Lennox was led into a plain, echoing room. On the mess table of the air sea rescue officers lay a naked man, a sheet beneath him. "And I know it sounds mad," Lennox would later recall, "but he looked good. His hair still slicked back, his complexion. He looked as if he was still alive. Apart from a graze on his left shoulder, the body appeared unmarked." Lennox signed the affidavit confirming the identification. At the Spanish official's request, he stood beside the corpse holding the affidavit while they took a photograph. "Somewhere in the Spanish archives," he would say later, "there's a picture of me standing with Robert Maxwell's body." Word came back to Ghislaine, while she stood on the Lady Ghislaine's deck, consoling her mother in the main cabin between quiet consultations with the crew. Supplies were inventoried. The captain's log reviewed. A few instructions given in private. Her father was dead, or no longer useful. The distinction mattered less than it once did. November 6, 1991. In Las Palmas, the machines were already moving. Not the visible ones, press helicopters, television vans, curious port officials, but the quieter machines, the ones that did not wear insignia and never traveled alone. Mossad's deep clean protocols had been set in motion hours before Robert Maxwell's body was even confirmed. In London, a man with a Metropolitan Police badge, but no rank, presented an envelope at the gates of Headington Hill Hall. The uniformed officers barely glanced at it. Moments later, he and two plainclothes men were escorted into the estate. They spoke little, they carried no weapons, but they each wore gloves and carried black, unmarked cases. For 6 hours they worked behind closed doors, opening drawers, removing server blades, sorting papers by thickness and fiber content. A photo album disappeared. So did a floorboard safe in the second library. A concealed compartment in the wine cellar yielded a cassette recorder, which they crushed underfoot before taking the tape. When they left, they resealed the door with official police tape, replaced twice in the following days by actual investigators, none of whom would ever learn the original version had been a decoy. In Zurich, the numbered accounts under Maxwell's known shell companies were logged into once, then sealed. The balances vanished into new entities, which themselves were liquidated within 24 hours. One banker was later found to have accidentally overwritten a decade's worth of transaction logs during a supposed system upgrade. His resignation letter, typed in French and riddled with typos, was faxed to regulators before his wife knew he had left the bank. In Manhattan, Maxwell's residence, where she stayed with an Iranian friend, the same contacts that hooked up Epstein with his first townhouse, was entered by men posing as building inspectors. They spoke with mild Brooklyn accents and wore pressed khakis. But one had a sidearm tucked improperly under his jacket, visible for just a second to the doorman, who would later recall it as a private security thing. These men didn't search, they replaced. Hard drives were removed, swapped for matching models with cloned boot sectors and intentionally corrupted metadata. Rolodexes were left in disarray. Several files were replaced with forged memos dated months ahead, referencing deals that never occurred. When federal agents arrived a week later, they would find only contradictions. Leads that led nowhere. Names that didn't exist. Even in Herzliya there was motion. 2 low-ranking operatives were reassigned to a base near Beersheba. Their clearance cards were deactivated. One unit commander, who had worked on Maxwell's file since the early 1980s, was quietly moved to a consulting role with no digital footprint. His desk, emptied before lunch, held nothing but a paperclip and a hand-drawn map of the Golan Heights. From the outside, it all looked like entropy. A tycoon's death unraveling an empire held together by bluff and bravado. But the disorder was intentional, curated chaos. Each breadcrumb laid to redirect, each blank document left like an overripe clue. Investigators would later claim they found nothing of value. What they didn't find was the real story. The cleanup wasn't forensic, it was theatrical, and by the time the curtain dropped, the stage had been reset. November 7, 1991. By afternoon, the Lady Ghislaine was no longer just a yacht. It was a news item, a floating question mark, a scene of silence wrapped in speculation. In Las Palmas, mooring crews whispered versions of the story before the authorities even boarded. Fishermen passed around binoculars like relics. A British journalist faxed a headline before anyone had officially confirmed what had happened, or what hadn't. Ghislaine Maxwell stood on the upper deck, her back to the rail, hands folded, perfectly still. Behind her, the gleaming vessel caught the sun like foil, restless but unmoved. She wore a red plaid jacket, tailored and sharp, her posture unshakable. Reporters arrived by dinghy, 2 British, one from Reuters, and a local stringer already rehearsing his radio cadence. She didn't wait for questions. In measured Spanish, she gave a prepared statement, then switched to English. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all the many hundreds of people who have sent messages of support to us at this very, very sad time. On behalf of my mother and brothers, I would like to thank the police and military in Tenerife who helped with the search for my father. I also want to thank the press for their courtesy and consideration to my mother and to us at this time, which we appreciate very much. She closed with a calm nod, gracias a todos, and thank you very much. There was no tremor in her voice. No tears. No improvisation. The words had the rhythm of rehearsal, delivered as if she'd been taught long ago that one day she might need them. And that when that day came, this was how it must be done. The yacht's purser distributed a typed statement to the press. Without another glance, Ghislaine turned and stepped across the side deck, disappearing into a shaded corridor that led to the inner quarters. Below deck she moved with quiet precision. She entered her father's private study first, then the hidden compartments in the library, the secondary chart room, and a storage cabinet disguised as a wine locker. She knew where everything was. She knew what to take. Letters, photographs, hand-marked ledgers, tapes labeled with codes she'd memorized months ago. Assigned crew members, trusted, silent, already briefed, shadowed her. They handled the rest, shredding documents, burning sensitive items in a compact incinerator kept for emergencies, and deep cleaning specific compartments flagged for forensic concern. Nothing was left to chance. No drawers overlooked, no paper spared. She had almost forgotten, but it was perhaps the last place to clear out. She walked searching the floor, then she recognized the faux wood grain pattern in a particular spot her father had shown her, a couple of years ago at this point. Pressing firmly, then pushing sideways, the floor paneling was removable. There was the small safe in the cavity. She retrieved a leather-bound ledger and a compact silver key encrypted with rotary pins. Also inside, 2 LTO5 cartridges labeled in embossed tags. A third slot was empty. Below them, a sealed envelope addressed in Robert Maxwell's hand. She didn't open it. Not yet. She made 3 phone calls, the first to a maritime attorney in London, the second to the captain of the yacht who nodded and left the bridge without comment. The third to Herzliya. She spoke just 2 words, "It's done." By the time she returned to her cabin, the yacht was once again just a vessel, clean, silent, and deniable. Across the channel, in a private meeting room inside Wexner's legal offices near St. James's, Jeffrey Epstein sat with a cup of herbal tea untouched in front of him. On the wall, a television cycled through morning coverage. The broadcaster's voice was muted, but the crawl across the bottom of the screen read, "Maxwell feared loss to TC." Beside him, Wexner's counsel flipped through a folder of contingency contracts. Epstein didn't speak. Instead, he underlined a date on a calendar page in front of him, November 12. Then he crossed out a name at the bottom of the page. Scribbled in its place was a set of initials, GM. In Herzliya, a woman in a control room turned to a black terminal, entered a secure passphrase, and brought up a personnel file tagged Max RB. She hovered over the status field, then changed it with a single keystroke from primary to archived. A window flashed, inheritance clearance pending. She clicked confirm. Later that evening, aboard the yacht, Ghislaine dined alone in the captain's cabin. The table had been set for 4. The other places were never used. The meal was modest: cold fish, over-steeped tea, a folded napkin untouched. A first mate offered to join her. She declined with a small, practiced smile. She did not cry, she did not speak, she finished every bite. When the steward cleared the table, the ledger had disappeared from her place. November 8 to 9, 1991, transit and arrival in Israel. The coffin was sealed in Las Palmas with no fanfare. A British consular official signed the release papers without reading them, his pen stuttering over the signature line, as 2 Israeli attackers waited without expression. The body, wrapped, anonymized, then re-identified, was lifted into the cargo bay of a military-modified Boeing 707, tail insignia scrubbed. It flew under diplomatic clearance. No customs, no manifest, just a name, Maxwell. Ghislaine sat in the forward cabin, alone, a wool coat folded across her knees. She wore no makeup. A plain folder rested on her tray table. She didn't open it, didn't need to. The only movement was the slow, rhythmic blink of the biometric case buckled into the seat beside her. Halfway through the flight, a steward passed her a message from Herzliya, written in pen on unbranded stationery. OP Vault, control realignment, confirm readiness by 11 November. List follows. She didn't reply. In Herzliya, inside a low-rise building with no signage, 3 Mossad officers reviewed the draft transfer. It was marked Alternate Executor Protocol, Vault Clearance Tier 1. The assets list was long. Digital nodes in Zurich and Manhattan, dormant accounts in Liechtenstein, an archive in a compound south of Eilat. One of the men tapped his finger beside a name, Epstein Jeffrey. A notation followed, retain, independent vector, Maxwell confirmed. A second officer checked a calendar. She's here in 36 hours, he said. The third didn't speak. Just pressed a thumbprint against a scanner and logged the document to cold storage. The plane touched down in Israel on the evening of November 8. There were no sirens, no cameras. A black Mercedes met the aircraft at a restricted tarmac and drove silently through the rain. Ghislaine didn't speak during the ride. She watched Tel Aviv's outskirts blur by the old neighborhoods and new towers divided by construction fences and floodlights. The car stopped in front of a modest villa in Ramat HaHayal. Two men in civilian clothes opened the gate. Inside, the house was quiet. One man she recognized, retired liaison, still sharp, slower to smile. The other she'd only met once, during a foundation gala. Now he served tea in complete silence. "Your father was a volatile man," the elder said, "but effective, in the ways we required." She said nothing. He placed a file on the table and slid it toward her. "These are the entities requiring continuity. Some are sensitive, some are overdue." The second man finally spoke. "We've tagged the systems, they'll respond to the key sequence your father used, and if they don't," she asked, "they will." He hesitated. "Is Epstein ready?" She nodded. "More than he knows." No one smiled, no one toasted. When she left, the elder man stood and added, almost as an afterthought, "Mount of Olives, military detail. You'll ride with him." November 10, 1991, Mount of Olives, Jerusalem. The stone terrace on the Mount of Olives baked under the Jerusalem sun, its heat a relentless assault on the mourners assembled in pressed uniforms, dark suits and high-collar coats. A thin wind stirred cypress branches, brushing rows of dignitaries arranged with IDF precision and diplomatic choreography. Robert Maxwell's plot, reserved for prophets and generals, held his coffin, draped not in Union Jack or press insignia, but Israel's flag, lowered by 6 men whose hands betrayed no secrets. The box was sealed, not by Jewish law but discretion. The official cause, accidental drowning, cardiac event, printed in 6 languages, none convincing. The crowd shifted, whispers of pension funds drained, off-book government contracts, Mossad accounts blooming in Luxembourg and vanishing days before his death, the Lady Ghislaine found drifting empty off the Canaries. Chaim Herzog, Israel's president, stood at the podium, his voice steady and resonant, echoing off the ancient stones. A man whose heart beat for this nation, whose contributions to our security cannot yet be fully told. Silence followed, polite but heavy, the press cordoned behind police ropes scribbling every word. Herzog continued, detailing Maxwell's role in the 1948 war, his media empire's defense of Israel, but skirting the Mirror Group's collapse, the $1.2 billion missing from employee pensions. A British envoy shifted uncomfortably, his aide whispering about Mirror shares plummeting in London. Herzog's closing line lingered. He had secrets he took to the grave, and others he returned before leaving us. Applause came brief and reluctant, the eulogies ringing hollow, empire builder, champion of Jewish survival, warrior of information, omitting the dead reporters, the betrayed investors, the reckless threats of insurance documents to Thatcher and Gorbachev. Ghislaine Maxwell stood rigid at the front, her black dress tailored sharp against the wind, gloves simple, hat modest, no tears in her red-rimmed eyes. Flanked by Israeli cabinet officials and stiff British envoys, she felt the weight of their glances, not as a grieving daughter but as a successor, her father's mantle thrust upon her unasked. She wasn't ready, the thought gnawing like a thorn, his empire of media and espionage, his chaotic web of leverage now hers to untangle. Her mother, Elizabeth, sat beside her, solemn and silent, a widow's grief a stark contrast to Ghislaine's churning dread. Elizabeth leaned close during a pause in the speeches. "He left us a mess, darling. The banks are calling," Ghislaine whispered back. "I know. The files. He mentioned a vault." Elizabeth's hand tightened. "Burn them if you find them," but Ghislaine knew better. The vault was the key, her father's insurance against enemies, now her burden. Behind her, up the slope, intelligence attaches lingered in the shade of a limestone wall. MI6, CIA, Mossad, their silence louder than words. Mossad's chief, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, nodded once to the British observer, who didn't reciprocate, a subtle fracture in the deep state's alignment. The CIA liaison, a tall American in a grey suit, murmured to his aide, "Maxwell's Bulgarian deals, the promise backdoors, he was our cutout for Eastern Europe," the aide replied, "and Israel's nuke program. He funneled the mirrors from Czechoslovakia." Ghislaine caught fragments on the wind, her pulse quickening. They saw her as Maxwell's echo, a vessel for his vault, the repository of secrets he'd curated for the deep state's will. She felt their eyes, assessing, expecting, her Oxford polish and charm insufficient against the shadow of his recklessness. A Pelco spectrodome on a nearby roof scanned the crowd, logging faces, deviations, absences. A signal technician, hidden from view in a van below, tagged metadata in real time, underlining an American hedge fund pioneer for follow-up, his ties to Maxwell's Mirror Group noted. When the first shovel of earth struck the casket, a low thud echoing, Ghislaine looked left, not down, at the intelligence brass behind protocol's curtain. A Mossad officer's faint head tilt was a signal. She was the conduit now, ready or not. The rabbi intoned the Kaddish, voices joining in uneven Hebrew and English, the wind carrying dust from the grave. The ceremony ended with military salute, rifles cracking the air, the flag folded and presented to Elizabeth, who clutched it like a shroud. Ghislaine embraced her mother briefly, the envoys offering condolences in clipped tones. A British diplomat pulled her aside. Your father's service to the crown. Unparalleled. If there's anything... Ghislaine nodded mechanically. Thank you. The family appreciates it. But her mind raced to the townhouse in London, the safes, the tapes, the Promise software her father had peddled to intelligence agencies worldwide, backdoored for the syndicate. In the King David Hotel's secure penthouse suite, 2 floors above the diplomatic press corps, Ghislaine closed the blinds against the golden afternoon light, her gloves discarded on a glass desk. The room was sterile, beige walls, the minibar untouched, a faint scent of lemon polish. A white envelope waited on the pillow, no return address, just 2 words in block letters, Vault Redirect. She didn't open it immediately, her fingers trembling as she set it beside a biometric key case her father had given her years ago, for emergencies. The dome of the rock shimmered outside the window, timeless against the modern city, but her world had shifted irrevocably. She wasn't ready to be her father's shadow, to carry his secrets, to navigate the deep state's maze of leverage and betrayal. Yet the envelope's weight, the brass's gaze at the funeral, Herzlier's training sessions in secure rooms, all told her she had no choice. She slit the envelope with a letter opener, pulling out a single sheet, coordinates to a Liechtenstein bank, account numbers, a password phrase, and a note, transfer complete. Epstein awaits instructions, do not fail. Jeffrey Epstein, her father's protégé in New York, his cipher-like ambition ready to refine what Maxwell had broken. Ghislaine exhaled, her reflection in the glass a stranger, the syndicate's next soldier, whether she was prepared or not. The phone rang, an unknown number. She answered, yes? A voice, American calm, the redirect is live. Manhattan tomorrow. Bring the key. The line went dead, the room's silence pressing in. Downstairs, the press corps buzzed with rumors. Maxwell's yacht found empty, body recovered by Spanish fisherman, autopsy sealed. A Mossad contact slipped her a burner phone in the lobby. For emergencies. Your father's line? Ghislaine pocketed it, the weight of succession a chain. Elizabeth joined her in the elevator. The banks are frozen. We need to move fast. Ghislaine nodded. I know where to start. The doors opened to the lobby. Flashes from cameras, questions shouted, but Ghislaine walked through. December 1991, London, New York. The weeks after the funeral unfolded like a slow implosion. In London, Ghislaine moved through her father's townhouse like a ghost, the rooms thick with creditors, tabloid photographers and family lawyers who spoke in clipped tones about damage limitation. She sat through board meetings she didn't understand, signed papers she hadn't read, and delivered polite statements about legacy, responsibility, and the dignity of silence. Every time she passed the front parlor mirror, she avoided her reflection. Paris was worse. Her father's old friends vanished. Dinner invitations dried up. Intelligence liaisons returned her calls, but only to say they had nothing to offer. She flew briefly to Geneva, to close a bank account no longer in her name. One banker said, "We are deeply sorry," with the same tone someone might use to speak of a dog that had gone feral. A French cousin offered her a farmhouse in Aix. She declined. She needed something louder than silence. By mid-December, she boarded a plane to New York. No press, no announcement, just a one-way ticket and a black wool coat 2 sizes too thin for the Atlantic wind. She told herself she was going for closure, but in her pocket was a number, Jeffrey's, and the slip of a name he'd written in pencil during the last call. East 65th. Ring twice, no elevator? Her bags were light. She had no plans to return. The penthouse conference room at the 69th Street townhouse had no signage, no buzzer at the door, no directory listing, but everyone invited knew how to find it. At precisely 8 p.m., Jeffrey Epstein opened the reinforced door himself. He wore a dark turtleneck, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and a half smile that said, welcome and warning at the same time. Inside, the lighting was soft but clinical, designed to flatten shadows and eliminate tells. The scent of bergamot still clung to the air, though no candles burned. On the long oak table sat a single biometric case. It blinked, steady and green, waiting to be opened. Leslie Wexner was the first to sit. His security man stood 3 steps behind him, silent and armed. 2 lawyers followed, one in pinstripes, the other in the kind of nondescript tailoring that meant government work at some point. The last to enter wore no tie and no name. His watch was military issue. He nodded once to Epstein and never again. Through the service elevator, Ghislaine arrived without ceremony. A simple black coat, scarf tucked high. She didn't look at Wexner or the lawyers, only at the case. She set her handbag down, took a seat beside Epstein, and crossed one leg over the other, the picture of practiced ease. Epstein opened the biometric case with a thumb scan and a 4-digit secondary key. Inside were 2 sealed folders, a small leather-bound ledger, and a secured flash module labeled BV Redirect. The contents had been copied from the yacht, triple encrypted, and then reformatted for transition. Maxwell's era was over. What remained was data, names, vectors, leverage. Wexner asked no questions. He only said, "Show me the asset trails." Epstein gestured to the screen on the far wall. A map of interconnected nodes bloomed outward from Geneva, London, Tel Aviv, and New York. Trust accounts, Shell, companies, private art holdings, campus initiatives, defense research grants, tech incubators. A new program was proposed, a philanthropic fund seeded with offshore capital and designed to attract what Epstein called ideologically promiscuous donors, the kind drawn to status, ambiguity, and secret access. "It's not entrapment," Epstein explained. "It's calibrated exposure. A behavioral sieve." The unnamed man from the security consultancy opened a folder and slid a diagram across the table. Fiber mesh listening panels disguised as architectural accents. Video nodes wired through power lines. Scent-triggered neural submonitoring for higher-tier suites. Ghislaine smirked, eyes never leaving the flash drive on the table. "We're not replacing my father," she said. "We're refining the model." By midnight, the room was empty, except for Epstein and Ghislaine. The biometric case was locked again, though the flash drive remained in his breast pocket. She poured 2 glasses of Tokaji from a decanter Maxwell had once kept in his London study. It was unopened until tonight. "Do you miss him?" Epstein asked. She looked at her glass. "Sometimes, but not like people think."